What if I can't pay my rent? Hey, it's a question people have, and I want to demystify this and also offer this information without any judgment whatsoever. People have this problem. I'm here to offer some suggestions. Hi, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and I bring you a fresh perspective on the law without offering any legal advice. So pull up a chair. This is what we're discussing today. As I said earlier, today's question is one that a lot of people are afraid to ask out loud. What if I can't pay my rent? First of all, you need to know this. You're not alone. Millions of renters fall behind at some point, whether it's because of a job loss, an illness, or some other unexpected problem. But it's important to understand what can happen legally and what steps your landlord can take if you don't pay. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Let's start with what happens the moment you miss a payment. Most leases have a grace period, usually somewhere between 3 to 5 days, where you can pay late without a penalty. After that, you're likely going to be charged a late fee. That's because this money that's coming into your landlord is money that he is investing. And if you don't pay him when you're supposed to, he's losing money on the interest that he would get otherwise. So he's charging you a late fee because you're late. Now, sometimes the landlord may send you a reminder or a formal notice, but either way, you still owe the rent. Even if your landlord hasn't contacted you yet, your obligation to pay doesn't go away. And in fact, in most cases, it's wise to call the landlord, explain the situation, and ask them to give you perhaps a little additional grace period so that you can gather the funds to get them taken care of, if that's a reasonable option. But either way, you need to let the landlord know that, hey, I can't pay right now. If you still don't pay after the grace period, the landlord will usually deliver a notice to pay or quit. That's an official document that says you must pay what you owe within a certain time, usually somewhere between 3 to 7 days, depending on your state. And if you don't pay or move out, the landlord is going to start the eviction process. This notice is required by law in most states before even filing an eviction lawsuit. You have to give notice. Look, you're over the line. You can come back over on the right side of the line if you pay, but if you don't, we're going to have to evict you. If you get a notice to pay or quit, whatever you do, don't ignore it. This really is often your last chance to resolve the problem without having to go to court. If you still haven't paid or left by the deadline in the notice, the landlord can file an eviction lawsuit. This is sometimes called an unlawful detainer case. In Missouri, it can be called an unlawful detainer case or a rent and possession case. Either way, the bottom line is they want their money and they want you out of their property. So here's how it works. The landlord, or more likely the landlord's lawyer, files a piece of paperwork in court. And within 3 to 4 days after filing that, you will get a summons and a complaint. In Missouri, it's called a petition. And you'll have a set time to respond. Now, it can be short, like 5 days, and sometimes it can be a little bit longer, up to 30 days. That's a feature of state law. And so, whatever the statute sets as the time to respond, that's the time you're going to be given. If you don't respond, the landlord can win by default. In essence, he goes in, he says to the judge, Judge, they haven't shown up. We gave them notice before. We served a summons on them. They haven't shown up. I would like a default judgment of this amount, which is going to be the amount that's due, and I want the property back. One thing that a lot of landlords have done recently is instead of renting on a month to month basis, saying, I'm going to give you a 1 year lease and you owe $300 a month, that's probably been a while, and you owe $500 a month. Instead of that, what they do is they say, you have a rent of, what would that be, $6,000 a year, which you can pay in even installments without an interest at $500 a month. So you're really on the hook for the whole amount of the rent for the lease. That's what the contract says. Now, there are special provisions in most states that make it so that you're unlikely to actually have to pay that. But if you don't show up and the landlord wins by default, any opportunity you had to contest that is likely gone unless the court gives you the right to proceed after the default judgment. Sometimes they will allow you to withdraw the default judgment if you have a viable defense. So next you go into court. If you do respond, the court schedules a hearing. At the hearing, the landlord has to prove that you have a lease, that you were obligated to pay a certain amount of money, that you didn't pay it on the date that it was due, you didn't pay it within the grace period, and then after that, you have failed to make any payment in the last however many days it's been. And then the landlord will ask the judge for the rent that's due as well as possession of the premises. If the judge rules for the landlord, the court issues a judgment of possession, and that means you lose the right to stay. Now, a lot of times people ask, how long does all this take? Well, that's a feature of state law, and it varies a great deal from county to county. If you were in a county like Knox County in Missouri, which is rural and very small, you would probably be able to get an eviction done within a couple of weeks, maybe as short a time as 3 to 4 weeks, you'd be able to be evicted. But in other states, and particularly in big cities, it can go much longer than that. But here's a typical timeline that applies in many states. On week 1, the rent's due and unpaid. Week 2, you get a notice to pay or quit. Week 3 to 4, the eviction lawsuit's filed. Week 5 to 6, again, depending on the service of process and what the court's docket is like, the court hearing takes place. And week 7, if the landlord wins, the sheriff posts a notice to vacate. Now, if you don't leave, you can be locked out. And in many cases, they call the sheriff to dispossess you from the premises. So the sheriff knocks on the door and says, hey, you got to get out. And you say, well, I got all my furniture in there. Well, the landlord is going to pay for a group of people to move your stuff out of the apartment and put it on the front lawn. And if that happens while you're at work and people come by and take your stuff, in most states, the landlord is not faulted for that. So you have to be aware, if you miss your date and you know you've got a notice of quit coming, you have to make plans to get out of that property and get your stuff, anything that you really value, out of that property. So in many cases, you may have only between 4 to 8 weeks from the first missed payment to the actual eviction. And states like New York, California, Washington State, Oregon, Illinois, those are quite a bit faster. And in the big cities like Miami and uh, Atlanta, again, it can be a little bit longer because there are so many cases filed. So, what can you do? If you can't pay your rent, here are some things to consider. As I said earlier, communicate early. Call or email your landlord as soon as you know there's a problem. Many of them will work with you if you're proactive. If they have to chase you down, they're less likely to want to give you any support whatsoever. Ask about payment plans. Some landlords will agree to a partial payment or a schedule to catch up. In other words, they'll let you pay rent this month for next month, or for last month, I should say. Instead of paying $500 a month, in one payment. They'll allow you to pay $100 a week to catch up for this month, and then another $100, so $200 every week, so that you can catch up what you're behind on. They don't have to do that. In most cases, they're not required to do that, but sometimes they do. Also, look into rental assistance. Cities, counties, churches, charities often have emergency funds. You can dial 211 or search online for local help. Whatever you do, don't become despondent, don't despair, don't take reckless actions. This is not the end of your story. And also check your rights. Some states have special protections, like extended notice periods or limits on eviction during emergencies. One place you might go to get some assistance if you can't afford to hire a lawyer, and if you can't afford to pay your rent, you probably can't afford to pay a lawyer, consider going to legal aid. Most states have legal aid. They are there for exactly this kind of thing. If you get a court notice, call legal aid. They might be able to provide free help or representation for you. The place where I used to volunteer a lot of my time in Jefferson City, the Good Samaritan Center, has a legal care project, and even though they're not an official legal aid, they offer help to people in this very situation, and I've helped people in this very situation through them, so I know this is right in their core mission. Don't ignore the notices. This is your most important thing to do. This can almost guarantee that you'll lose in court. Don't withhold rent without legal advice. Even if repairs are needed, you could still be evicted. Don't move out without documenting everything. Take photos and get receipts to avoid future claims. Many times, people will say they banged up the apartment, they knocked in and left holes in the wall or whatever. One thing that I always recommend people do before they move into an apartment is take pictures, so that when they move out of the apartment and they take pictures, they can show exactly what's changed between the day they moved in and the day they moved out. And in that way, they can protect themselves from any false claims that some disreputable landlords might try to make. So, what happens after eviction? You're still going to owe the back rent. The landlord can sue you for unpaid amounts. The eviction is going to show up on credit reports and rental screenings, making it harder to rent in the future. But an eviction is not the end of your story. You don't have to live in your car. There are ways to find housing. You have to be diligent and look, but there are ways to rebuild your rental history over time. Remember, if you can't pay your rent, don't panic, but also don't stick your head in the sand either. Talk to your landlord, talk to your family, look for help, know your rights. Acting early can make a huge difference. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you found it helpful, interesting, or maybe both. If there's a subject you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to send me an email at the address above. If you like what we do, please feel free to subscribe and come on back to the beach tomorrow. I release videos every weekday, weather and work permitting. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness for your fellow man. It makes the world a better place, one kind act at a time. And now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine that you might like.